Rick was an unattractive, pitiful, and seemingly hopeless loser who made a drastic decision to quit his job after working for 14 years as an adventurer guild clerk. He then disappeared for 2 years, training under the strongest team of adventurers to learn all the basic skills necessary to become an F-rank adventurer. After a grueling training session, Rick found himself thrown to the ground, utterly exhausted to the point where he thought he wouldn't live to see the next second. Despite his exhaustion, his masters were impressed by the significant improvement he had made over the past 2 years. They were convinced that the E-rank test would be a piece of cake for Rick, though they hoped he would hold back to avoid destroying the arena. Rick humbly remarked that his strength was nothing compared to theirs. Upon returning to the city, Rick entered the Adventurers Guild to take the E-rank promotion test. He walked over to the counter and presented his guild ID. The receptionist, about to give him his admission ticket, recognized him as her mentor. Rick remembered Alyssa, even though he hadn't seen her in 2 years. He was surprised to see her working in the Central Guild, but she was even more surprised by his sudden resignation 2 years ago and now bewildered that he had become an adventurer. Rick was uncertain because he knew starting as an adventurer at age 30 was not smart. Most people started at F-rank during their teens and got promoted to E-rank 2 years later. Alyssa wondered what Rick had been up to, and he explained that he had been training in the mountains with senior adventurers. Suddenly, a drunk adventurer approached the counter and rudely made a pass at Alyssa. Alyssa tried to decline his advances, explaining that it was still within her working hours, but the adventurer persisted. Rick intervened, trying to get the adventurer to back off. Angered, the adventurer accused Rick of ruining his game. Rick pulled him back and gave him a belly tap. Alyssa apologized for the inconvenience, but Rick reassured her that he had handled similar cases during his time as a guild clerk. The adventurer then passed out in Rick's arms, drawing the attention of other adventurers in the guild. Rick set the adventurer on the floor, explaining that he had drunk too much and advised everyone to drink responsibly. Alyssa handed Rick his entrance ticket, wishing him luck on the test. Rick noticed his contestant number, 4242, and became worried because it was an unlucky number. As Rick walked out of the guild, Renette was waiting for him. Meanwhile, the other adventurers noticed a handprint on the drunk adventurer's armor and were surprised by it. They recognized the drunk adventurer as Damal, a former A-rank adventurer wanted for assault. Alyssa was shocked that Rick had left such an imprint on Damal's armor despite handling him gently. Rick proceeded to a part of the guild where his details were recorded. His height was measured, and one of the clerks was surprised to see that Rick was 32 years old. After his physical stats were taken, Rick moved to a room with a crystal ball to measure his magic energy. While most participants ranked between D+ and C, Rick barely generated any reaction, earning an F rank. This made the other participants mock him for being old and useless, noting that he held the world record for the lowest magic ability. They hoped they wouldn't turn out like him. Just as the guild official was about to call the next participant to the crystal ball, it suddenly cracked from overload, to everyone's immense surprise. Rick then entered a hall where participants were instructed to strike a slime bag with all their strength to measure their power. This brought back memories of his training with one of his masters, who used a golden slime bag. Back then, Rick doubted he could destroy the bag because he wasn't strong enough. His master insisted that destroying the bag was a fundamental adventurer test and demonstrated by easily destroying the bag himself, noting that he could destroy 200 slime bags at once. Motivated by the rigorous training, Rick began practicing with the slime bag, delivering an astounding 50,000 punches per day. The participants were called up one by one to take the punch test, with their abilities noted by an observing official. When one participant, the second son of the Duke, stepped up, the others recognized him. Although he was only 11 years old, he was said to have the magic equivalent of a C-rank adventurer. Eager to impress, the Duke's son conjured a level 3 natural blaze magic. To everyone's surprise, the spell was tiny when released. The other participants were impressed by the flame's modest impact on the slime bag, and the observer praised the child prodigy's abilities. However, Rick felt underwhelmed. He remembered his master's version of the same spell, which had created a massive fireball that burned down a nearby forest. Rick concluded that the young prince had compressed his magic for safety indoors and silently praised his talent. As other participants took their turns, Rick noted the high damage capacity of the green slime bag. When Rick's number was called, he walked up to the bag. The observer stopped him, noting his unusual path, becoming an adventurer at 30 years old. Skeptical of Rick's abilities, the observer advised him to give up on his dreams, thinking it was too late for him. Rick recalled his grueling training sessions with the golden slime bag, punching it until his fists bled. Despite his exhaustion, his master's motivation had always gotten him back on his feet. Though Rick agreed with the observer's skepticism, he wondered why older people weren't allowed to become adventurers. Channeling his rage, Rick struck the slime bag, bursting it open and spilling slime everywhere. The other participants were shocked, wondering who Rick was, but Rick thought the bag was defective. The Duke's son was infuriated that Rick had surpassed him but remained confident he would perform better in the defensive ability test. During the defense session, Rick defended against a level 4 nature-composed magic, which proved too difficult for the others. The guild official commended Rick's defensive abilities, impressed by his use of level 1 nature-composed magic to counter the spell. The official then decided to use a level 5 nature-composed magic spell, recommending Rick use a higher spell level for defense. Rick shamefully admitted that he could only use level 1 nature-composed magic. Surprised by Rick's precise magic control, the official decided not to hold back. He cast the level 5 wind spell at Rick, who easily defended against it, clearing out the magic spell without breaking a sweat. Sylvester, a first-class knight, noticed this from a distance and wondered what was happening. He visited the test area and was briefed by the guild officials, initially thinking they were playing a prank on him. When a female official showed him Rick's details, Sylvester was surprised to see that Rick was 32 years old and had worked as a guild receptionist for 14 years. He wondered if the title, clerk, was given to someone who defeated a dragon, but the official assured him it was not the case. Meanwhile, Rick joined the other participants for a written test. Afterward, he sat on a bench outside with Renette. She asked how the test went, and he confidently replied that he would get a perfect score, having put his 14 years of experience as an office clerk to good use. Rick was concerned about his F- magical ability test, but Renette reassured him that he would be all right. Suddenly, the Duke's son approached Rick, addressing him as a commoner. Rick had trouble remembering his name, which infuriated the boy. Freed started crying, accusing Rick of stealing his spotlight and ruining his official debut into the adventuring life. Rick was surprised by the boy's tears, but then Angelica, the senior sister and eldest child of the Duke, stepped in. She threw her glove at Rick, challenging him to a duel, determined to teach him a lesson for making Freed cry. Rick picked up the glove, making a comment about how nobles didn't value clean clothes since they didn't do their own laundry. Renette pointed out that by picking up the glove, he had accepted the duel. When this dawned on him, Rick couldn't believe it. They proceeded to the arena, where Angelica, following the rules of the Kingdom of Philom, asked them to state their conditions for the duel. She proposed that the loser would serve the victor for life. Rick was worried because Angelica was a member of the Knights of the Realm, the protectors of peace in the kingdom. Renette noted that Angelica was equivalent to a B-rank adventurer, which worried Rick even more, but she told him to go easy on her. Though Rick didn't fancy his chances as an F-rank adventurer, Renette reminded him of his training over the past 2 years. Rick almost lost his mind recalling how grueling his training had been. But Renette encouraged him to have more confidence, reminding him that Orem Fist, the strongest party on the continent, considered him a member. This inspired Rick, and he immediately regained his confidence. Angelica decided to go easy on Rick, thinking he was just an F-rank adventurer. As she drew her sword, Rick noticed she was a sword user who boosted her abilities with magic. She rushed at Rick, intentionally missing him to show off her speed. Rick appeared stunned, and Freed boasted that Angelica was so fast she was nicknamed the Flash. Rick, unimpressed, watched as Angelica promised to stop holding back in her next attack. She used her speed ability again, but to Rick, she seemed so slow it was as if she were running on water. Lost in thought, Renette called out to him, and he dodged Angelica's attack with ease. Angelica was surprised that Rick had dodged her attack, thinking it was luck. She decided to attack him again. Rick, disappointed by her slow speed, was impressed by his own strength. Suddenly, Angelica tripped on a stone, turning her lunge into a spinning attack that Rick barely dodged. Unable to read Angelica's movement, Rick was on edge, but Angelica pretended her attack was intentional. She told Rick she would attack with 3 times more speed and used her ability again, but she was still slow from Rick's perspective. This time, Rick dodged her attack without hesitation, surprising Angelica. Angelica, now only able to use her advanced ability twice more, decided to go for it. She attacked Rick again, but he dodged easily. She unleashed her last attack but tripped, turning it into a low attack. Rick, ready to counter, was caught off guard but quickly punched downwards, creating a huge hole. Angelica, thankful she tripped, realized she would have been in serious trouble if she hadn't. She asked Rick who he was, and he replied that he was an ordinary man who became an adventurer after working as a clerk. Angelica didn't believe him. Rick decided to go all out, but to his surprise, Angelica surrendered. As she left the arena, Rick reminded her of the duel's condition, stating he would use her condition since he hadn't stated his own. Summoning her last energy, Angelica put it into her legs and left the arena before Rick could say another word. Rick didn't consider the duel a win, feeling uneasy, but Renette reassured him that Angelica had acknowledged her loss. She suggested they return to the guild as the results would be released soon and informed Rick that his masters would visit to see how he was doing. Overwhelmed by the news, Rick had an immediate meltdown. The Akashic Record, a treasure granting any wish, was given to anyone who could defeat Kaiser, the ultimate monster. An adventurer had once failed to defeat Kaiser but hoped that one day, an upcoming adventurer would bring down the beast and make up for his failure. Meanwhile, Alyssa announced that the test results would be released momentarily. She explained that mana would be sent to their exam tickets, and those who passed would see their tickets glow blue. The successful candidates would then participate in a mock battle in the second stage the next day. Rick, not confident he would pass, was consoled by Renette, who reassured him that he would ace the test. She warned him that if he failed, he would have to triple his training, prompting Rick to pray to all the deities to pass. To his immense relief, his ticket suddenly lit up. Rick stared anxiously at his ticket, wondering if he would pass. After a tense moment, the ticket glowed blue, and he rejoiced, informing Renette of his success. She congratulated him, and they left the classroom. Rick expressed his relief at not having to return to training, but suddenly, a foul stench filled the air. Covering his nose, Rick wondered where the smell was coming from. A noble approached Renette, introducing himself as Raster, the first son of the Duke of Damu, ruler of the North. Rick struggled to remember his name, so he decided to call him Nori. Raster asked for Renette's name, and she introduced herself. While Raster marveled at how sweet her name sounded, He frowned at Rick, showing no interest in him. Rick felt heartbroken, but Raster didn't care and turned his attention back to Renette, attempting to impress her with a not-so-superior pickup line. When that failed, he boldly asked her to become his second wife. Fed up with Raster's advances, Rick intervened, which pissed off Raster, who wondered why an old man was being so nosy. Rick informed Raster that he couldn't keep hitting on Renette because she was his girlfriend. Surprised, Raster noticed Rick's participation ticket and laughed, mocking Rick for still being an F-rank hero at his age. Rick assumed Raster was also there for the exam and tried to turn the tables on him, but Raster, disappointed in Rick's assessment skills, revealed that he had reached E-rank at 14 and was now an A-rank adventurer serving as an examiner for the second part of the exam. Raster showed his crest and asked Renette to leave Rick for him, but she kindly declined, saying she was dating Rick. Rick blushed so hard he almost exploded. Renette then teased Raster, saying his perfume had a disturbing smell. Realizing the stench's origin, Rick saw Raster fuming and promising to show Rick the difference in their capabilities if he ended up being his examiner. Raster walked away, determined to prove to Renette that she had made the wrong decision. That evening, Raster, still fuming from his encounter with Rick, went to dinner at the castle. Fried and Angelica, his siblings, came running to him in tears. Fried complained about being disgraced by an old man during the test, and Angelica shared how the same man almost humiliated her in a duel. Raster, connecting the dots, realized they were talking about Rick. He asked Fried for the man's participant number and confirmed his suspicion when Fried mentioned the unlucky number. Raster was pleased, anticipating his chance to face Rick in the second part of the exam and exact revenge. The next day, Rick and Renette walked to the location of the second test. Renette reminded Rick to hold back, but Rick admitted he couldn't, especially if Raster turned out to be his examiner. Filled with dread at the possibility, Rick was suddenly stopped by Lynx, who informed him he would be his examiner for the second stage. Rick rejoiced, relieved that Raster wasn't his examiner. Lynx found it unusual for a 30-year-old receptionist to switch careers to become an adventurer. Rick thought Lynx was mocking him, but Lynx expressed genuine admiration for Rick's determination. He was glad to see a fellow middle-aged man chasing his dreams, recalling his own journey of becoming an adventurer at 24. Lynx, now in his 40s and still striving to achieve a rank, found inspiration in Rick's story. They shook hands, and Lynx invited Rick for a drink after the test. Around the corner, Raster eavesdropped on their conversation with a mischievous smile. Lynx, sensing Rick's dedication through their handshake, decided to train even harder. As he returned to his quarters, Raster cornered him for a discussion in the prep room. Rick was in high spirits, which Renette noticed, but a messenger suddenly entered the room with news for participants numbered 4,200 and above. He announced that Lynx had fallen ill and their new examiner would be Raster Damo. Rick didn't recognize the name until Renette reminded him it was Nori from the previous day. She noted that Raster might be related to Angelica and Fried since they all shared the same surname. Rick couldn't believe his ears. Other participants expressed concern, scared of Raster. Renette wondered why they were so worried, and one participant explained that Raster was nicknamed the F-rank Crusher because he tormented participants who caught his attention. Rick realized he was in a bad situation, having gained not just Raster's attention but also his wrath. Raster entered a mock battle with one of the participants, easily defeating him with his ice magic, and expressed disappointment in how powerless commoners were. An elite guard suddenly called his attention to deliver a message. Meanwhile, Rick had a meltdown, wondering how to escape his predicament, but Renette told him there was no point in worrying. Rick wanted to go home but remembered that his training would triple if he did, so he resigned himself to the fact that he might not achieve his dreams. Renette advised him to gain inspiration from those who doubted him instead of letting their words weigh him down. She assured him he would pass the test and defeat Raster, as she had believed in him from the day he decided to become an adventurer. Moved by her words, Rick regained his confidence. A hooded figure suddenly approached Rick, offering to help him through his midlife crisis with fortune-telling. The figure reassured Rick and offered a free trial. Feeling reassured, Rick took a seat with the figure. Renette noticed a spell on the seat but couldn't act quickly enough before Rick disappeared as soon as he sat down. Fried praised himself for tricking Rick into his trap, but Renette threatened him, demanding to know where Rick was teleported. Fried tried to be tough but quickly gave in, revealing that Rick was within 100 meters. Rick found himself wondering if he was behind the arena when mercenaries hired by the elite guards surrounded him. They introduced themselves as the elite guards of Damu, and Rick realized Raster was behind his predicament. The guards promised to ensure he wouldn't be able to take the test. Rick was disappointed they had to resort to dirty tricks. The chief guard informed him they were equivalent to B rank in A-rank adventurers, and Rick realized he couldn't escape unscathed. Rick's masters suddenly appeared, wondering why he was outside the arena instead of taking his test. Rick lied, saying the guards were helping him train, but the guards debunked his claims and threatened his masters. Rick begged the chief guard to call off his men, but the guard ordered them to attack his masters instead. One guard's sword shattered upon hitting Brune, who expressed disappointment at the guard's negligence of weapon strengthening. The guard tried to fight but had his fist crushed by Brune. Brune healed the guard's hand, advising him on improving his fighting form. The guards were shocked that an orc could talk and use magic. The chief guard recognized them as members of the strongest party. Missit figured out Rick was being bullied and decided to handle things with his custom gun. The other guards targeted the other masters, but Missit took them down with his weapon. He offered Rick a shot with his gun, but Rick declined. The chief guard confirmed his theory that they were members of the strongest party. Another guard threatened Iser, but they advised him to let her go. Iser, triggered when hurt, unleashed a high-grade nature magic, sending the guard flying. The chief guard recognized Iser, the vampire mage, and other members of the Orichalcum Fist, the strongest party of S-rank adventurers. The chief guard was so impressed that he decided to retire. Rick returned to his test while his masters handled things. Fried wondered how long Renette would hold him hostage. She told him until Rick returned, but he doubted Rick would come back unscathed from an ambush by the elite guard. Fried was shocked when Rick returned unscathed. Rick apologized to Fried as Renette tossed him away. Lynx, looking hurt, walked into the room, and Rick helped him to a bed. Lynx revealed that Raster hurt him and lied about his illness. Lynx was disappointed he couldn't stand against Raster and advised Rick to forfeit the exam. Rick reassured Lynx and headed to the arena. Raster easily took down another participant when one of his guards returned, apologizing for failing his mission. Raster was surprised that Rick still showed up for the test, thinking he would be discouraged. Raster decided to give Rick a taste of true suffering, but Rick, unfazed by his threats, silently promised to take him down for what he did to Lynx.